Hello and welcome to Android Developers Backstage. I'm Tor Norbye from the Android Developer Products team.
I'm Chet Haase from Chicago Student Life.
Hi, I'm Romain Guy from not the Android Toolkit team.
Wait, what happened?
Yes, I have left Google last week, actually, after 18 years. So it feels weird. I'm unemployed.
All right, and our guests today...
Hi, I'm Theresa. I am the product marketer for trust and safety when it comes to the Android and Google Play ecosystem.
Hi, and I'm Naheed, and I'm a product manager on Android. I work on trust and growth.
See, Tor, that was a lot smoother the way they talked about their titles, so you should learn from them.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about app safety today. What's new in the app safety space for Android?
Well, first, can we explain what it is?
No. I asked first.
Okay.
Just kidding. Yeah, let's talk about what is it.
So app safety, when it comes to Android and Google Play, is that we have multiple levels of protections to keep this whole ecosystem within Android safe so that developers can come in, feel that they can build thriving businesses and reach millions of users all around the world who trust and feel confident downloading and trying apps. And it's generally protecting this ecosystem, protecting this community so that everybody can thrive and flow.
Can you be more specific about what is that trust? Trust what? Trust that their APK is not going to have code injected into it? Like what are the specifics?
It is for developers to feel that I'm protected from someone maybe trying to impersonate and steal my account. My app, I have tools from Google Play to help me protect my business so that if somebody's trying to do some suspicious activity, hack into my app, I know when that's coming, and then I can decide what I may want to do. We can give them lots of tools so that they can build their apps safer from the very start with SDK index or pre-review checks to make sure that they have any of the privacy and security elements within their apps the way that they should. And that Google is going to help them with definitely lots of tools and education, support, and courses so that they're building apps that are safe for people to use. And they have ways to share transparent information about maybe what data they're collecting, how they're using it.
So is your focus for the developer angle, or is it for users of those apps, users of Android?
I think when we think about user safety, I think first and foremost is from the user's angle, is that how do users feel when they download the app? Do they feel safe? I think this is where a lot of the concepts of malware and what harm could happen if you download an app. It could be, is this app going to steal all my data that I have on my phone? Or is it that this app is spying on something or something like that? So there are issues like, and this is in trust and safety world, we use these words like malware or spyware or maskware. And so those are a lot of things.
I've never heard of maskware. What's that?
It masks the behavior in trying to show that it's doing something else than what it's intended to. And sometimes you don't know exactly what it's trying to do, and it's cloaking its behavior behind the scenes and doing something else. And so that's how we think about that. There is first and foremost is user harm. And how do we make sure that the apps are doing exactly what they intend, what they're saying they're doing? Then the stuff that Theresa also talked about is it's a two-sided marketplace. And on your phone, there are a lot of things that you have on your phone. There are other apps on the phone as well. And then of course, the phone is, if you are an OEM or somebody, you can actually do a lot of things and see what's happening on the device. So there are a lot of super user apps on the phone that can see what other apps are doing. So how do you protect the developer also from the things that might happen because somebody else is also on the device at the same time?
All right. So how do you do that?
How do we do that?
Or how much can you share? Because I'm assuming some of it is like if you were to say exactly what we do, that would help bad actors circumvent those checks.
Yeah, I think there is a fine balance between we educate the industry and harms and also make sure that we help button up, but also we need to make sure that we keep our cards close. So first and foremost, one thing is we evaluate app description. So whenever a developer submits an app to the store, they have metadata as in the description of the app, and here are the permissions, and here are the safety labels and our data practices, and here's our privacy policy.
So I'm curious about that. How far do you go? Because I remember in the very early days of Android, there were apps that came out that they were claiming to, clean up the memory on your device, clean up the
RAM saver.
Yeah, RAM saver, whatever. And I remember and it's like, knowing the system, it's like, there's no way they can do what they claim they can do. And we looked at the code, we looked at what they're doing. It was basically a fake progress bar, and would run the garbage collector on their own process. So they were doing nothing. So do you go to that extent of looking at whether the app actually does what it says, or is it more, like you said, the safety labels and the permissions?
Oh, absolutely. I spent hours in looking at those kind of apps. I had literally a laundry list of apps. It's like, this is snake oil. This is definitely a snake oil. It's just fooling the user. So we do have deception policy where we say that you cannot deceive the user by saying something and doing something else, and we will take down those kind of apps as well. So I think there is a different level of sophistication from just at a high level, you are doing what you are saying you are doing, and then going into the innards of the app and then understanding the behavior of the app as well. So we do something like analysis of the app code itself. We run the app ourselves. We then say that, hey, is it actually, when you run the app, is it also behaving in certain way? And then we have reviewers who will review the app and say and evaluate based on different criteria for different policies.
So I imagine there's a fine line there as well, because some things like I was describing are pretty obvious, but some other things, let's say I'm just making something up, right? But let's say I publish an app on Play Store and I claim that I'm playing certain frequencies of sound that will make your life better or you're going to be happier. Can we look at that and say that's not real, or is it like, well, the app is technically doing what it's...
Are we to be judged on pseudoscience?
Yeah, and the app is not, is not stealing your data and it's playing a sound, whether or not it's real. That's not for us to say. I assume you have there's a fuzzy boundary somewhere.
There is a fuzzy boundary. I think we debate on, this is where innovation comes in, is that a lot of creativity and innovation actually is kind of itching on the boundary of, oh, it's magic, or it's not possible, or it's, oh, wow, kind of a thing.
Placebo. Placebo, so it works. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that we need to be judicious on that. And so we are very careful, and clearly I think we have a bar. We say that you clearly are deceiving. At this point, we're going to, at certain point, you see the hardware evolving, where sometimes I would pause and say, hey, maybe the technology is there. There is gyroscope here that maybe you can put something and this can weigh how much you are putting on it to be able to measure the weight of thing. Initially, I thought, nah, not possible. And then I had to go and watch some YouTube videos and then try to validate. So there are those kind of...
Yeah, I remember, wasn't there apps that were looking at your heart rate using the camera? And yeah, actually makes sense. That's how heart rate monitors kind of work.
I'm assuming the second there's a medical claim that probably there's extra policy involved.
There's extra policies, exactly. And that's what I was thinking about as you guys were talking about this, is there's a whole spectrum of severity of harm that it can do to a user, right? So we love delightful and helpful, innovative apps out there. At the same time, when it comes to very specific, very sensitive categories, we'll have extra permissions you might need to ask for, extra declarations for you to tell us what your app does and doesn't really do, and extra policies to make sure that it keeps people safe. And I think health is a very important piece of what you claim your app can help someone with or not. I think health, banking apps, those are all certain places where we need to be extra careful to protect users.
It's funny because my first reaction when you say that, it's naturally I would never work on any app like that, just because it sounds like a minefield between the regulations and the harm you can do to users. I'm I don't want to deal with that.
But also potentially benefit.
Yes.
There's only so much you can do with the game.
So some of the stuff that we were talking about here, like the sort of evaluation of, is this real? Is this, what permissions are they asking for and do they need? And what are the tools that we can run to make sure that the privacy and user data is protected? Like all of that is more the sort of internal sauce that we probably can't get into deep details about. But you mentioned some of the stuff that we do for developers. Like maybe we can talk about some of those tools, because those are the things that developers probably need to know more about or would like to know more about. You mentioned SDK Index. I can't remember the other tools you mentioned, but can we get more details on what those things are and what they provide?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we did, and we have been talking about this for past years, so we launched new tools. I think one of the things, before going into SDK Index, I think one of the biggest risks an app developer can take is bringing code from outside. And this is where supply chain risk and stuff that people talk about is that, hey, you are now pulling something else that you don't 100% control. And is there something harmful there? And I think we care a lot to try to make sure that app developers are very judicious and they have enough information about third-party libraries or SDKs that they use. And we launched SDK Index last year as a way to publish the list of SDKs that are most commonly used and the data practices of those SDKs. So the developers, when they are looking for what they should use, they can go to SDK Index and discover those SDKs.
Has it only been a year? It seems longer than that.
It's more than a year.
Okay,
At least I feel like I started working on the project a year, so that's my window.
What you're mentioning is interesting because when you do publish a library, let's say on Maven, you have to upload basically a signature, so that someone can certify that what you're downloading is actually what was uploaded. But as far as I know, nothing will do that check for you automatically in Gradle. I know we do it in Android X. We want to make sure that no one replaces the bits on without telling us.
It's actually one of the reasons why back in the day, for Android, we chose JCenter, not Maven Central, is because JCenter offered HTTPS. And so we could no one could do like a man-in-the-middle attack of changing the bits under you. But ultimately, all you're doing is you're saying, okay, I'm definitely getting the bits from, malware actor, X, right? The point here is that you are getting the bits, but they could have hidden stuff in that payload that you don't know about, because all the signature does is say, yeah, this is what I built. And I think what you're doing then is to go one step further and say, okay, we're going to have some knowledge about these libraries. So you can see, hey, this library looks convenient. What do we know about it? Is this from a reputable author? Is it known to do weird stuff with location, for example? Is that what exactly is the SDK Index reporting, and how is the data self-reported, or do we do analysis on it?
So it's a bit of both. So the adjacent service to SDK Index is SDK Console, where an SDK developer can come and register and provide information about their SDKs. And so that gets fed into SDK Index. Now, there are things that developers can tell us that we publish on SDK Index, like what is their data practices or their safety label guidance, which is one of the big things that app developers on Play Store need to go and submit when they submit their app to Play Store, as in what data they're collecting or sharing or so on and so forth. We also have useful signals for app developers, is that how popular this SDK is, how many apps on the Play Store are using this SDK. So those kind of signals are also visible in Index.
How do you know?
This is from the Play data. So whenever an app submits the APK to the Play Store, we analyze the app, and we know that these are the third-party libraries that are used by this particular app.
If they're not shrinking, that seems easy to do. If they are shrinking, it seems harder to do.
That is true. So I think this is where we need a little bit of help from the ecosystem, and we need to see more of these. There is a thing called in the Gradle file, you can declare your dependencies, and Play looks at that to give you better guidance on whether this SDK is good or bad. So it's very important for us to have that information. So if you're listening and if you're an app developer submitting an app to Play Store, please submit your Gradle file, dependency files, and tell us what versions of SDKs you are using.
So that's something that we generate automatically when you build with Gradle, but it's not part of the APK. So you have to provide it to the Play Store. Is that correct?
No, it gets bundled inside the
bundled
APK.
In the app bundle?
Yes, in the app bundle.
Okay, so then you have it automatically. So
we have automatically, but some developers don't have that or don't have that setting, or they're using some other tool that file is not really readily available, and we would love to see that more.
Or they don't use Gradle. Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can.
Yeah.
And the SDK Index is a great place for a lot of developers to start. When we launched this, we talked to developers and said, how do you know which SDKs to even consider? Right? There isn't. Before SDK Index, there wasn't a library or a registry of SDKs that they could all consider for whatever purpose they needed. And so this helps them show them where the most common SDKs are used out there. Not only that, when you go into a specific one, maybe what version do you want to consider adding to your app? And which of these SDK owners have told us, yes, I've looked at my own SDK, and we promise that we comply with all of Google Play policies. So like all in that is a great place for developers to get started. And then we take it even deeper where we have the SDK console. So SDK owners who create their SDKs and want to partner with us, it's fantastic. Through their console, they're able to go and communicate with app developers who already use their SDKs and let them know there's a critical update. This is something that we need you to.
So that is great because, as a former purveyor of libraries and SDKs, one of the hardest things to do, especially when your library doesn't have like a backend component, is to figure out like who's using which version of my library and how do we reach out to those developers. I mean, for us, being Google, it was not that hard to reach out to developers, but just having like a sense of how many people are on the latest version, why are they stuck on an older version, seeing that the SDK index provides that. And even not as an author, because you show some of that data to regular users. If you just go to the SDK index, you can see the percentage of users on each version of the library. It might be an indicator of like, hey, that version, no one seems to be using it. Maybe there's a problem with it or something like that. But I got to say, yeah, also looking at the categories of the SDK index, I was someone who doesn't build apps with ads. I was surprised by how many ads SDKs there are out there. So it's definitely a good discovery tool.
Yeah, a couple of comments. I know Romain agrees with the first one is that if you're listening going like, well, I don't use any SDKs, I think SDK is just library, right? I think we just decided to call it SDK. There's a few things that are SDKs, like the Android SDK is an SDK in the sense that the thing that you're compiling against isn't what goes in your app. It's really stubs, right? Whereas most of SDK index is actually libraries that you're consuming. But at launch, I think it was focusing on commercial SDKs. And so that kind of made it limited because like Android X isn't a commercial SDK. There's a lot of those libraries. Are you including non-commercial libraries at this point?
So we do have a plan. And so that's something that we would love to see how we can expand SDK index going forward and try to see that what is it that developers want to see. And we are talking to a lot of developers right now and said that what information, what kind of SDK should we make sure that we publish on index?
Don't ask developers. The answer is going to be everything.
And make it run faster. Yeah.
Hey, so I have a question that at the risk of exposing my extreme ignorance in this area, I wonder whether some of the new AI stuff, Gemini and Android Studio is forcing this even more. Like when you get code suggestions, when you ask the assistant for, hey, I'd love to solve this problem, and it spits code back at you, does it take upon itself the responsibility of saying, oh, by the way, also pull in this library because, the data that it is basing this on is gotten from the real world where, people use this other SDK for achieving that goal?
I think we
sort
would
of a
like
question for the room, but Tor, obviously you would kind of know the level of my ignorance here.
What we do right now is if you have, one of the things we're trying really to be careful about is letting people choose what they want to share with the AI, right? So we have the whole mechanism of AI exclude files, and by default you have to opt in to say, Gemini can look at my source code. But if you've said yes to that, which you have to if you want code completion, right? Because that's looking at your source code. If you've said yes, then we can attach some more context to your chat queries. And one of the things we're attaching now are dependencies. So we can tell, you're using material 3, not material 2. So when you're asking a question about material, we're going to give you the right kinds of statements, right? If you ask an open-ended question, and my sample question for this used to be, how do I take a picture using camera X? Well, then you get camera X samples. Right. But what we have not done is the natural next step of like getting recommendations from the SDK index of like, hey, if someone asks how to do something with like biometrics, we should suggest these 3 libraries.
You mentioned choice because I think based on what Theresa was saying, I think it would be fantastic if I'm asking, Gemini, hey, how do I add ads to my app, that it says like, here's the list of ads SDKs that are part of the SDK index, and here's the link so you can look at whatever information you can use to decide. Because I feel like you need to be neutral and not like impose a choice, right, for the developer, and just give them the information.
The choices are based on weights in the Gemini's,
No, I get that. But if I say, how do I do X with camera X, I think it's great that you make me use camera X. But if I'm very open-ended, it's like, show me what's available.
I agree. The trick now is called retrieval augmentation, right, where you give the AI, some authoritative answers as part of the query. So like when you ask a question today in Gemini and Android Studio, it does a search first to get some facts, and then it runs that through Gemini, right?
Right.
That's more factual. And so I think what we should do is, when we understand the question is about libraries, we should make a query to
I mentioned that because I think it would be fantastic to avoid this problem that we see, frankly, also in the Play Store, but in any, library online where if you look at the top games on Play or even other app stores, they haven't really changed in many, many years, because since they keep showing up in the top 10, people will keep downloading them. And so it's like self-reinforcing, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like if we do the same here, whatever is the current popular library will be the library that we'll keep recommending when there might be better alternative for you.
I think that's fair. The recommendation is a tricky one in the sense that we cannot be opinionated as in, here is the library you should use. But here's what we can do absolutely. And this is something that we've been discussing quite a lot, is for any AI agent or tool that's helping the developer, at least we can say that here are the SDKs that have violations or have security vulnerabilities. Please don't recommend this. So you are not injecting bad stuff, which is known.
It's a good idea to not recommend things that...
I think I'm contractually obligated whenever something is related to Android Studio for me to bring it up. SDK Index is integrated with Studio. So when you are running Lint from Gradle or in Studio editing your build files, on the fly, we actually consult the SDK Index, and next to each dependency, if there is a known security issue, a known policy violation, you will get warnings along with details and a link to jump straight to SDK Index. So you don't have to navigate to this page and browse around like you did in preparation for this. I mean, you can just use Studio, and you actually will get warnings on your existing libraries. It's really a good place to go when you're looking for that new library type.
You mentioned Lint. What is that?
Nicely done.
We're really excited about this, and this is something, you've touched upon something that we are looking at across different teams, is how do we help developers build safer apps like easier and from the start. And a few years ago, I would say that a lot of the issues we were dealing with are developers not understanding our policies or not knowing when we're updating them, changing them, when there's a deadline. So we did a lot of work to build a lot of resources for developers, make sure that we communicate any changes with them really far in advance so they have ample time to make changes that they need to, resources from Help Center articles, webinars with FAQs, Policy Byte videos. We even opened up Developer Help Forum where developers can go talk to other developers to get questions and assistance with what they're managing. That feel like we've built all of that, and now we're taking it to the next step, where in the past couple of years, we've already been doing things to help developers get all of these, help get them guidance early in their journey, right where they code, with Lint warnings and Android Studio. And now we're so excited to expand that even further this year to add much more specific information relevant to your specific app and the policies that you need to pay attention to right as you code.
I was afraid you were going to say that we're introducing the Google Play Chat. It will be a new chat app inside Android Studio where we ping you when there's...
We already have one of those, Romain. It's called Gemini Native Studio.
Yeah, but you have to start the conversation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Can you,
no, but that's true. That's very important what you're saying, especially for a lot of developers where, Android, or mobile in general now, it's very hard you can't be an expert in everything. Mm-hmm. And there's so much information, you can't keep track of everything. So the more we can help you get aware in a timely manner, mm-hmm. that's helpful.
One thing I'm interested in is that, the developers might rightly say back, well, please don't change stuff. Why are you inconveniencing me? Right? And I'm assuming there are good reasons why we're doing these. So can you talk a bit about sort of how you weigh developer convenience versus safety of users of those apps? 100%.
And the vast majority of developers are great developers who want to build helpful, innovative apps out there. We're looking at that very, very minority of developers who might want to take advantage of the system and trick users or steal information. At the same time, we're also looking at market changes. We're looking at new technology that's coming in. And with exciting new technology, such as Gen AI, there's also ways that we want to balance and make sure that as developers are building these features into their apps, they're able to keep users safe with that. And Gen AI is super exciting, and we're all looking at how to optimize it. At the same time, I think we're also looking at, okay, let's help guide developers a little bit. There's ways to build it more safely, and it takes a different kind of testing to really look into, well, how do I test this and put on a red hat if I wanted to go and exploit this app? What kind of prompts, might they put in, and really see, okay, what are the guardrails here that you want to check into?
But I think you mentioned two very important things, right? One is things change over time. Like when we started Android, the apps could do a lot more than they could do today. And part of it, like maybe it was naivety or we were like too optimistic. And honestly, it's the same if you take like traditional computers, right? What an app can do on a traditional desktop when you install a random app from the internet is pretty scary when you think about it. But that's the way it's always been. So we're kind of okay with that. And things have changed a little bit lately. And the other aspect is, and I know it's hard for developers, but you're part of an ecosystem, right? So you might be doing things with the best intentions in the world, and you're protecting your users, and you're protecting your app, and you're protecting Android. But there are people who are not doing that. And unfortunately, we all need to play with the same rules. So yeah, that's frustrating.
And as they get more and more sophisticated, we also are looking at making our systems and detection systems much more sophisticated to stay a step ahead of them.
Yeah, I would say nobody likes to go through the security check on airport. But it's kind of like there is an overhead that we all have to kind of understand that for the overall safety of the system, we need to have certain kind of guardrails. So that's one thing I would say. The second is also that different developers and different markets are at the different level of sophistication. So because we are trying to cater to 3 billion users around the world, we need some kind of a foundational guidelines.
Of course.
And I think that's important. Sometimes what we do is a lot of our policies around, hey, here is what kind of standard guidelines are. So no matter where you are coming from, at least you can be at the baseline foundation. And that's what developers come to expect, saying that, hey, if I download an app from Play Store, I need certain level of expectation. And I think that's kind of sort of that what we are trying to set.
Right. Yeah, and it's true that, there are sometimes legitimate reasons why you might want to do something that the policies won't let you do. But, there will be so much harm that could be done by other people that maybe it's not worth enabling that use case. And again, it's frustrating. And also, it's hard for users. I remember like one of the issues with permissions, right? When we introduce permissions on Android, and I'm sure we all do this, it's like the terms of service. You get trained to basically accept them without really looking at what they are or what they actually do. So at this point, it's like...
But that was a pretty good... I mean, you're talking about conditional permissions or dangerous permissions, right? Like the camera. It was one of those things where like, yeah, you might blindly say accept, but it would probably raise an eyebrow when you're using, a flashlight application. Like, wait, why are you?
Yeah, but I was thinking more about, for instance, recording a phone call, right? There is a legitimate use case for you might want to record your phone calls. But if any app can do that, and, you say yes to the permission without paying attention, or because, you read quickly, it sounds like it's doing audio recording and you don't realize that means it can record any phone call. Is that really what you wanted to agree to? Maybe not. So yeah, it's a fine line to walk and it's difficult. And as users, we're all also guilty of, because it's a burden, right, for the users.
I think that brings up a lot of, on the user side, when we talk about market changes and innovation changes, user expectations also change. And you mentioned this a bit, like not only do they expect certain levels of quality when it comes to using Android apps, they expect certain levels of security and privacy.
I mean, so what you are saying is the trust aspect, right?
The trust aspect. And we, on the consumer side, what we can do is help bring that transparency out. So if you're a great app that you don't collect a lot of information, you don't use it very much, in Google Play, we give you a place to share all this information with users. You can also share, if users may want to delete your app or delete their account, we can share information about that. So all this information that users have come to start expecting and that might make them hesitate trying a new app because of these concerns, they can go and look at that there.
I'm just curious, is there a way to indicate that if you subscribe, it's easy to unsubscribe? Because I know that I'm not going to try to pick on, this is not an app thing, it's more of a newspaper thing, but some of them make it very difficult to unsubscribe. So it's it would be great if they could advertise, you can subscribe, and don't worry, you're not going to have to sit to do a 2-hour phone call to get out of this if you change your mind. Is that something we surface?
I think that's something that we pay attention to as we develop the policy, which is if you allow someone to create an account for an app, it should be just as easy to take that account off and all the information that that company may have stored about you.
Yeah, actually, we introduced this feature a couple of years back, which is exactly a way that user can delete the account. And I think one of the things we were saying, like when the regulations came, there was this thing called right to be forgotten from GDPR perspective, where you could request deletion of an account. Now, that was very centric for web ecosystem. But when it comes to mobile, it's tricky. You uninstall an app. You don't like an app and you uninstall. Then what do? And that company has no website whatsoever to go to. Do you have to reinstall the app, go through the whole sign-up process? Like, no, I don't like that app. I don't want to deal with this.
And if you're lucky, you find a way to answer. It's funny how easy it is to subscribe sometimes. You know, it's like when you unsubscribe from a mailing list and you're told, like, oh, it's going to take up to 10 days. I'm like, what takes 10 days in this day and age? Like,
all you're doing is confirming that this is a valid email address that can continue to...
But at least think of it like, at least on the Play Store, the subscriptions, like if you are paying for a subscription, that's something that's easy. You can go to Play Store and unsubscribe to any recurring payment.
And that's a fantastic feature, honestly. Like being able to manage them outside of the control of... But one of the things that I think that was great about, some of those policies, I think you were describing that, Theresa, but... kind of forcing the developers to explain why they require permissions, because we're in tech, so I think we have a deeper understanding of some things, like why does this app need to discover Bluetooth devices on my network. But for a lot of users, like they wouldn't know why the app needs location or so on, and sometimes it has to have that permission to function. So it's great that we're kind of encouraging developers to do what they could have done since the beginning, is explain to the users like what's going on and why it's important to the app. So I think that has been useful. And sometimes, you're like, you don't need to know my location.
So one thing I would add on the permissions, and it's kind of the expectation, this is the trust part. And this sometimes Play acts as an intermediary to make sure that the trust is managed. Certain things users can perceive and answer. So this is our classic runtime permissions, that location, it's obvious for the user what location, and you are an app that needs location like maps. Yes. But there are certain things that users might not be able to understand. And so at that point, it might not be easy for us to just put a prompt in front of the user and user to make that choice. And that creates kind of a fatigue for the user where they don't have enough information to make that call. And a lot of those kind of permissions become dangerous permissions, where we would have a process where you need to tell Play Store, and Play Store can evaluate that, and based on your justification, we can say yay or nay. So that's how we also demark that certain permissions are easy for developers, users to make a decision, versus certain ones that Play Store can help.
An example that comes to mind, I remember trying to use a note-taking app, and it wanted to know my location, and I realized that they have a feature where you can embed your location in Notes so that you can, see your notes based on... And I understand why you might want that feature, but at the same time, how do you present that to the user? Because it's such like a niche feature within already an app that's complex. How do you surface that in a way that's easy to grasp? And because I assume if everybody says no, then why do you even bother with the feature in the first place?
Well, wasn't that the point of runtime permissions? Like, do they solve that to some extent, that at the time that you need this permission, then you pop up something in front of the user explaining why you need this permission to sort of give that context?
Yeah, but that's where you can get that fatigue of like you're constantly prompted for things, and then you just gloss over what's in front of you.
It makes sense, like when I'm trying to open the camera that it asks for camera access. It's less clear than when I'm taking a note, suddenly says, what's your location, right? And so what I've seen some apps do is to explain, before they request the permission, why they're about to request it. And that works, but it's developer work, right? And so I guess it's better, if this could be supported in some other way.
Yeah, the one example I would give is we have this permission called all files permission, or manage external storage. I think this is another one where we migrated from web or desktop systems to mobile, your ability to scan all the stuff that you have on your desktop versus ability to scan everything on your mobile, I think it now feels very invasive, because mobile phones are very personal. and we have a lot of personal data. And so does the app really need access to all the files, or can it just live with the files that it needs to store into its own folder? And I think this was a big one, and I spent quite a bit of time to try to figure out that how do we evaluate apps for full
I like
storage?
this example because I think it's also context-based, right? Because I fully understand why, and on mobile, we started from a world where like the apps could not access everything. But just yesterday, I was installing a new terminal on my personal computer. First thing it did was like, can I access your home folder? Can I access your download folder? I'm like, yes, you're my terminal. I want you to see everything. Now, I understand why the system, is trying to protect me, but like, it's a terminal. Let me see my system. But on the phone, my reaction would be the opposite. It's like, why do you need to see all that?
No, I actually had a similar situation the other day. This was on OS 10, and I was running something from a Java process, accessing something that I had downloaded to my downloads folder, and it was claiming the file didn't exist. And of course it existed, and I was like, ls. I was like, the file is there, what are you doing? And I realized, no, it's automatically rejecting the access because this is a protected folder. And the second I moved it to /temp, then it worked fine, right? But I think your example is good because I guess when it comes to accessing all files, this is something that you used to be able to do, and we've now said you can't do it unless you are like a file manager type of app, right? And that's the kind of the policy thing where like we made a determination that these classes of apps, it's reasonable for them. And the user understands, file manager app, it's going to access my files. But it's not so obvious that, a game would do it.
I mean, but that shows that, that's where, I think that's what you were saying at the beginning, where we try to take both sides of the equation into account. Like, we do see the value of a file manager. We want those things to exist. We just want to do it in a way that's, the safest possible. Your camera app or your podcast app should not probably access your entire file system.
Right. So as technology and expectations change and evolves, our policies are evolving alongside.
So I understand you made some announcements recently. By the time we're recording this before the announcements, but by the time this is released, you're going to have some announcements. So can you talk a bit about what those are?
I think by the time we publish this,
yes,
we will also have shared with everyone our direction in 2025 to help developers understand a lot of our strategies of what we're going into this year on how we're going to protect the ecosystem and make this experience better for developers. We've mentioned a lot about talking the different ways we're going to help you build safer apps from the start, from adding in enhancing more pre-review checks so you can check common policy pitfalls that other developers have also encountered before you submit your app for review.
So what does that mean? Does that mean like in Studio? Or like
that one was right in console. So we have a lot in Studio. We're going to expand more and more of different policy areas and guidance, not only about our Google Play policies, but about the third-party libraries you have in your app. We're adding in that guidance. We're adding more pre-review checks within console before you submit for review. We're going to continue enhancing SDK index. And so all really focusing on how do we help streamline this experience better as you're coding and before you review and publish your apps to the store to everyone.
Essentially, the developer has the ability to run a bunch of tools that are going to run on the app when it publishes, but they can run it as a preview process so that they don't go through the step and then a few days later find out that it failed some check.
Yeah, I can. So, Chet, I think the way I would say there are phases. So we think about developer or the app journey. You are in your developer studio environment and you're building code and you are just iterating through. It might take a month or two or quarter before you said, okay, I have this production code. Now I'm ready to publish. And then you come to the store and then you submit your APK. And so and then we review your app and then we give you that, hey, but this looks good. There are issues, go fix it. I think that go fix it, that's too late in the cycle. So there is one thing that what Theresa was saying, we call it pre-checks, which is you don't need to do a full submission play console, but you can just upload the APK and we'll do quick scan. And we'll tell you here are a few issues that we found, go fix it. So it doesn't count as a full submission, but it at least allows you to go and iterate by going into console. But this is still, we feel like this is late. Can we do more? And so this is where Studio comes in and said that, hey, the way early in the cycle, what more can we do inside Studio? So I think one of the things that we're doing that will be, that hopefully is published by then is is play checks or play policy checks in particular that can happen inside Studio. So for example, let's say you're using certain permissions. We talked about scope storage. And we'll say that, hey, here's a scope storage permission. This is sensitive. Here are the things that you'll need to do before you submit your app to the Play Store. So at least as a developer, you know that before I go in, I need to tidy up to make sure that my use cases justify the need for this permission. Should I keep it or should I remove it?
I want Gemini to build, as I'm writing code, to build me a checklist of what I should do before publishing. You know, like you need to come up with your safety labels. You need to like request that permission.
All right.
Get on it, Tor.
Yeah.
Feature request for you.
Yeah.
We're also really excited this year that we're enhancing. So other tools that we're thinking about helping developers keep their business safe and their users safe too. So it's not just work that we're doing on our policies or work that we're doing to proactively detect potential malware, but we're giving and enhancing tools for developers to build into their apps as well with Play Integrity API.
Right.
So with Play Integrity API...
Can you explain what that is?
Yes. Play Integrity API is a way that developers can run ways to check to see, is there suspicious activity happening on my apps?
Like did someone modify the app?
Yeah, is this app that my user is using, is it a real version of my app that I published and wanted people to use? Or did someone tamper with it and publish it in a different place and that's how the user is getting in? So
I could imagine one of the less harmful things that could happen is, let's say, a game that has been modified to cheat when you're doing multiplayer or something like this, right?
Mm-hmm, exactly. And so Play Integrity API helps you check that the people who are using your apps are real people from real devices. And if there's any suspicious activity, like tampered versions or people accessing code that they shouldn't really be looking into your app, there's ways for you to verify that. And then you can decide even things like, hey, my app, someone using this app, they have a really outdated security update. And we know that in that environment, that's not great, especially for something that's a banking app, for instance. So you can start adding things like, okay, if I either may want to prompt and let my user know they need to update their security. They haven't had a security update in over a year. Or you can say, okay, if you're in an environment and using this in an environment that I think is a little risky, I'm going to add additional protections and additional verifications that the user needs to go through.
No,
this isn't just to verify that no one has tampered with my app. This is also my app is running in an insecure system. Like someone's messed with it's a rooted system where they've done something suspicious. Okay.
We need to have the mess with the user library, because I remember video games, more in the early 2000s or the 90s, that when they would detect that they were pirated, they would change their behavior. So there were games that would do things like, if we know it's a pirated game, there's a chicken that's going to be following you through the whole game just to piss you off. We need to do stuff like that in apps.
That's
Make it
creative.
fun.
Yeah, well, if there's an integrity API, presumably you can call the API and then you could launch your chicken.
So one of the things that developers, and I think this is thing that I've been working on quite a lot, is we see a lot of developers get tricked up when they submit the app to the store and their declarations are incorrect. Like they're collecting this kind of data, that kind of data. And then what we find is that data was collected by this third-party library. And I think one thing we want to do as an industry is elevate this transparency. Transparency about SDKs, transparency about data behavior, data usage. And I think it will be more important as well when we go towards Gen AI, where there are a lot of models you can use. There are a lot of companies that are hosting this kind of models. What are they doing with the data? Do you understand? Can you delete the data? Those kind of questions. And I think this is top of mind for us as we are thinking about how do we evolve the model? How do we evolve the transparency structure that we have provided on Play Store so that not only consumers understand, but also app developers understand that what they are getting into when they're using these third-party models or third-party libraries in their app.
There is something, I think Android more than other systems goes a little further when it comes to libraries, because we have ARs which have their own manifest and they can add some information, but I think there is a need from just the technical standpoint of libraries can be pretty complex and pretty large, and like you said, they can have a huge impact on your app. They can request permissions, they could be doing God knows what. So it would be kind of nice if, like, from a technical level,
metadata in the AAR payload that records.
Well, I wonder if it needs to go even further, or like it's almost like, an app within the app almost that could be treated as such by the OS.
Probably is based on annotations. I'm going to throw that out there, but we'll see.
I agree with you, Tor. I think we need to figure out how do we automate things that are inside the code. So by the time you get out and you build a bundle, you can get a augmented metadata that is based on your code. I was like, hey, poof, here's all the behavior that I have seen based on your own code and third-party libraries that you have been using. I think that's my ideal world, and we need to figure out how do we get there, how do we move the system.
I was saying go even further and like protect the app from its own libraries. Like you could imagine if you go all the way to each library becomes
like
its own
privacy
process.
sandbox kind of thing?
Yeah, if each library becomes sandbox, I mean, that has a lot of implications in terms of performance and whatnot, but because you could imagine a library that lies until one day there's a trigger event that makes it like changes behavior and suddenly it's malicious, right?
This is what Chrome did, right? Where each page had its own sandbox. We probably should have an episode on privacy sandbox.
Yeah.
I mean, we've it's been disclosed in public, but we probably, and I'm going to be very embarrassed if we had one and I forgot. But it's time for an update. I'll just say it like that. Chat.
There's another situation I hit sometime recently where it is also possible for libraries to do things that apps wouldn't because, well, that was a dumb thing to do, right? So they're just going to call a super expensive at runtime, method in the SDK because it exists, and this was a convenient way for them to get the information that they needed for instrumenting XYZ or whatever. And it's really hard for you to know at the app level that an obfuscated code closed source library is doing this on your behalf. Like the only reason I was aware of this is because I was running the profiler and wondered why a certain thing was happening. And then I ended up, tracking it down to some library code. And this is not one of those permissions thing. It wasn't data that they shouldn't have access to. It was a runtime thing that really shouldn't be happening in the middle of your main loop. And I don't even know, like I probably shouldn't be raising this because I don't even know how to solve this problem, but it's like, how do we get more and more information on what libraries are doing on our behalf? Because a lot of it is really mysterious. We pull in the library and because we wanted, ABC, but this is a general case library that does A through Z, and in trying to do Z, it's doing some stuff that you really don't want your app doing on a regular basis.
Well, I just
even
learned
if
a
it's
new
not
word.
malicious, right?
I just learned a new word, maskware. This sounds like a maskware library, potentially, right? Where it's claiming to do one thing, but it does a bunch of unexpected things.
Yeah, and not even necessarily maliciously, but more because it is a general case library that does a bunch of stuff, not all of which you wanted to sign up for, but you didn't really have a choice.
Yeah.
Right?
This could be a feature you could imagine as like, hey, help me understand all the things this library is doing. And the way I think about it is there are two ways to solve this. One is let the self-declaration by the developer say that, hey, tell us the full story of what your library is doing. And you can imagine there is no standard structure to it, and we have this kind of fuzzy data everywhere. And then two is how can we observe the behavior and then document it and allow users to consume that kind of a content, which is a lot more structured and based on observed behavior. I think this is where it gets a lot more interesting to be able to say, hey, we know the observed behavior of certain kind of libraries and with some confidence level. I think that could be a value that we can add to the ecosystem.
It's tricky because I think sometimes you want a piece of functionality, and it turns out the only way to get that functionality is very expensive. So like in the old days, what you would do is you would basically monitor the log. You would turn on a bunch of spammy things, and then you would monitor the log. And that's going to be very expensive, but your library works because it was able to do it. But you didn't realize that when you use this library, all of a sudden you are collecting all this data.
Yeah,
I don't know how to
and
solve this.
I don't think, like the reason I raise this is I don't think there's a really good way to articulate how to get that information from a library. They are not asking for special permissions. They are not getting user data. They're calling a public method that is valid to call because it's a public method on the Android SDK, but it's not something that you would have chosen to do on your own.
Well, one thing that might be nice. So what we're doing now with new Studio features is we evaluate the feature based on its effect on the system health. Right. So like what is the delta to like the memory required and so on? It might be nice if the SDK index could actually like list some sort of performance metrics, with and without. Like, I don't know exactly how to how to measure it and in the general sense, but it might be nice to sort of show what this app will do. But But I think, we basically scared away Romain with that last
I noticed that. He just ran out of the room.
He's like that.
What did we say?
Yeah. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us. This was fun.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. And we
Thanks.
have a lot more to share this year. So super excited to talk about, even more so going through the year of everything we're going to.
Yeah. And if you have resources, we'll put those in the show notes. So, look for those in the YouTube channel or the podcast player show notes. And if you have questions, post those on the YouTube channel. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.